There's three types of air filters available for your bike. There's a paper filter, a cloth filter, and a foam filter. Actually, there's four. There's the Googletex matrix filter. We're going to be testing 5 filters today. It's just what we could find. I'm sure there's others out there, but they're all going to fall into these categories. We have a BMW paper filter. That's what comes on the bike. I've replaced many of these over the years. We have a K&N cloth filter. It's a cloth that's been treated with a special K&N air filter oil to help attract dirt and other particles. We have the Uni or UNI foam filter, which looks a little different than those because it's got 2 long foam tubes and a spring in the middle to hold everything in place. This we had to treat prior to the test using the Uni air filter oil. The K&N came pre-oiled. And then we have the Googletex filters. We're going to test the same filter but in 2 different ways because it can be used 2 ways. You can use it dry without anything at all. You just stick it in the bike and run it. But for extreme dusty conditions, we're going to take one of these filters and we're going to give it a light coating of this K&N oil, and that will improve the filtering for this filter. So those are the 5 that we're testing today. Let me describe our testing platform. We've constructed what we call the BestRestium air filter testing platform or system. What we've done is we've created a model that we can look into and see particulates that come through the filter that fits here, goes into a secondary filter. We're going to measure negative pressure in the system after it goes through both filters and record that on a manometer. Over here we have a blower that is actually going to create negative pressure. It's going to suck about 150 cubic feet per minute of air through. That's the rating for this. It's probably closer to 130, which is because of the boxes and things like that. But it's close to what you'd get on a real motorcycle. We did the math and we have a formula that will tell us exactly how much air your motorcycle needs. If air flow drops to a certain point, you're going to lose performance. You know, there's a lot of tests out there that have data and charts and all this stuff. And if you're a numbers guy, that's great. But we wanted to do something that we could actually see, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So as we're running this test, we're going to be using a special contaminant called BestRestium. BestRestium is something that glows because of its unusual qualities. It's a byproduct of some of the products that we make at BestRest Products. It's on the periodic table of the elements. We invented it, we created it, and we're going to use it in this test, and you'll be able to see with your eye just exactly what passes these filters. Over here is where we will inject or insert contaminants. We have a funnel that comes down into the air intake tube. As air is sucked through this tube into the primary chamber, it will suck the contaminants, in this case BestRestium, inside. It will be trapped then in the filter. Anything that passes the filter will go into the secondary chamber where it will get trapped by our secondary filter cartridges, which we have treated. And we'll look at all those cartridges when we get done, compare them to the different filters, and see, we can actually see with our eyes which one passed the most contamination. Air filters are a balance between airflow or contamination. If you get a lot of airflow, you're going to get contamination. If you reduce airflow to reduce contamination, then your performance is going to be affected. So it's a juggling act, and we're going to see which one of these filters does the best job of that. This test, we're going to do the BMW paper filter in the darkness so you can see the BestRestium going through the system. And let's put it on the far side. What I'm doing now is preparing our secondary filters. Our secondary filter is in a PVC fitting. It's got black cloth stretched across it, held in place. We have 6 of these. And what we have to do is to treat all of them with the same amount of air filter oil. And what this is going to do is trap the BestRestium after it comes past the filter itself. So I'll lay these down on the table, shake up my can of K&N air filter cleaner. I'm going to spray all 6. So now they have been treated and they're all identical. When we use these in the filtering system, we'll take random cartridges, so we won't know which one we're using. They should all be treated the same, and adding the air filter oil will help collect the BestRestium after it passes the air filter itself. The first test we have to do is run the system without any filters at all. In other words, how much air will this system pull through the air boxes into the motor? And we're going to measure that using the manometer. And in this case, we're going to be using inches of mercury. That's a relative function that tells us how much vacuum we're creating through this system. We'll power up the motor. And we get a reading of 0.108 inches of mercury without any filter in place. The next test we want to do is we've installed one of the pre-filters, just a random pick of one of them. They're all identical, the same piece of cloth and the same spray of air filter oil. In this case, this is secondary filter number 4. And we get a reading of 0.161 inches of mercury. That tells us the secondary filter is restricting to some degree. So now we're going to do the BMW paper filter. We get a pressure reading of 0.164. Now we're going to put the BestRestium into the system. Now we're testing the Googletech filter, the matrix filter, with oil or wet. We've treated it with K&N air filter oil. You can run that filter dry, but adding the air filter oil will increase the filtration under extreme conditions. Let's get a pressure reading. 0.162. Get a pressure reading of 0.171. Next, we're doing the K&N filter. It's an oiled cloth filter. Our intake pressure is 0.163. And our average pressure is 0.17. And we're putting in 12 grams. I'm using this piece of plastic as kind of a baffle to direct the flow of air so that we're sure that we get all the stuff onto the filter itself. Right now I'm reading 0.167. So now we're testing the uni filter. It's a oiled foam filter. Let's get a static reading. .164. Finished reading is 0.171. We've done our BestRestium test, sucking the BestRestium through the filter into the secondary filter, and we've taken photos of that. But now we're going to do part 2 of the test, which is the talcum torture test. What we're going to do is introduce 12 grams of talcum powder through the system, and then we'll collect the cartridges and photograph that. Now note that talcum is very fine, it's much smaller. This is actually 10 microns. So we do expect a lot of powder to pass through the filters and end up in the secondary filter. We used a scale to carefully measure the talcum, which we put into envelopes or cards so that we can pour this into the system. So I'm going to be pouring 2 for each filter, a total of 12 grams. And let's fire this up. We'll also turn on our manometer so we get a reading after we've put all this talc inside. Again, we're doing the BMW paper filter. In our negative pressure. Now we're going to test the uni filter using the talcum torture test with 12 grams of talcum powder. Difficult to get the talc through that tiny hole. Well, this is interesting on the uni. Apparently the filters become so clogged with the talcum that we can't even create a vacuum. We can't get the system to suck the talcum through the system. So what that tells me is this uni filter has reached a point where it's saturated. It will not allow any air to go through. There's no vacuum on this end, not enough to suck it through the nozzle and expel it through the system to be collected in the secondary filter. Next, we're testing the Googletech matrix filter, oiled. Of course, you can use that dry, but in this case, this is oiled with K&N filter. In the case of the Googletech wet filter, we're still getting plenty of vacuum. It is sucking through the system. I've got all the powder inside, all the talc. Unlike the uni filter we just tested, the Googletech did not fail. It continued to allow air to pass through. Same amount, 12 grams of talcum powder. And our pressure reading is I just saw 169. Next, we're testing the K&N cloth filter. It's oiled, came that way from the factory. using the talc torture test with 12 grams of talcum powder, which is a very fine 10 micron size. The K&N seems to have failed because I can't get any vacuum to suck through here. I would say that at this point the K&N is totally clogged. It's not passing enough air into the primary chamber. The secondary chamber I do see a vacuum, but this side there's nothing. Not enough pressure to suck the dust through. Our pressure reading over here is 162. Now I saw 168, 165, 165. Next, we're testing the Googletex matrix in the dry configuration. We have not oiled that filter. And that's the way you'd probably want to use it if you're riding on the street. Don't expect extreme conditions. We're going to be inserting 12 grams of ultrafine talcum powder that's about 10 microns in size. Get power. And we still had plenty of pressure that was sucking the powder through. We didn't get the failure to create vacuum that we did in both the K&N and the Uni. And we have a pressure reading of 1.70. Well, we finished our testing using the BestRestium air filter testing system. We've tested 5 filters: a stock BMW paper filter, Googletex matrix, wet, meaning it's been treated with air filter oil, a Googletex matrix dry, which is out of the box, no treatment, a K&N oiled cloth, which was oiled by the factory, and a Uni oiled foam, which we had to oil ourselves using Uni air filter oil according to their instructions. We didn't over oil or under oil. What we did is we passed contaminants through all 5 of these filters, starting with BestRestium, 12 grams of BestRestium. Once we did that, we recorded the view of the secondary cartridge to see how much BestRestium passed through each filter. When we were done with that, we then introduced 12 grams of superfine talcum powder, industrial grade, 10 micron in size. And we watched as it came through the filter and was trapped in the secondary filters. And by using the Mark I eyeball, we can tell that the paper BMW filter had less contamination than the uni oiled foam filter. And we basically rated these filters starting with best, just about the same best, not quite as good, worse, and the worst. And that's based upon what we visually see on these different cartridges. You know, some people might disagree with our conclusion, but I think if you look at the still photos under ultraviolet light, you can see there's a distinct difference rating them 1, 1.1, 2, 3, and 4 based on performance. Now the truth of it is the K&N and the Uni failed the test. And when I say failed, when we introduced the talc, they clogged up to the point that they simply would not suck any more talcum powder in through the intake tube onto the surface of the filter. We tried stirring, we tried everything else. We simply couldn't get those filters to suck any more air. So they failed. And if you were riding in ultra dusty conditions, that means that your air filter would fail and your engine would die because it would be starved of air. If you give enough contamination to any filter, it's going to fail. Filtration and airflow, it's a juggling act. You're trying to get enough airflow, but you're trying to have enough filtration so that you don't bring stuff into your engine to damage it. The stock paper filter seems to do a pretty good job, followed almost identically with the oiled Googletex matrix. And then finally, you have the dry Googletex matrix. The dry Googletex did a better job of filtration than the K&N and the Uni clearly. And you can see that on the individual still photos that show the contamination under ultraviolet light. So, you know, this is a garage test. We're not engineers, we're not scientists. We're a couple of guys that ride that wanted to get some honest answers to filtration and what works and what doesn't work. And I think from that perspective, this has been successful. Yeah, we took a bunch of readings with a manometer to see if that would give us useful data. And it told us that things were flowing until the point where the filters simply wouldn't pass anymore. But the purpose wasn't to collect scientific data, it was to collect visual data that we can see with our own two eyes. And clearly, the paper did a better job than the Uni, and followed by the dry matrix and these two, the oiled matrix. They're almost identical. So why not just use paper filters? Well, every time you replace this, it costs you 30 bucks. You only use it once and then you throw it away. If you ride a lot in the dirt and the dust, you're going to have to replace this 2 or 3 times a year. Whereas the Googletech, you can wash them with soap and water, clean them, and put them back in the bike. So you can literally do that at camp at night if you're riding in ultra dusty conditions. Or, I guess you could carry a couple of these on the bike and keep swapping them out when things got bad. From my perspective, I would use the Googletech because it's something that I can clean, I can replace in the field, and it never wears out. I'm not going to be getting these two filters because they failed according to the testing conditions that we subjected them to. Anyhow, Steve and I are not scientists, like I said. We're just a couple of riding guys, and we hope we gave you some good information that you can scratch your head on, make your own decision. This is David with BestRest Products, home of the cycle pump tire inflator that has a lifetime warranty. We'll see you on the trail. Uh-oh. So what we have to do here, Steve, is we got to get our light stuff set up.
Whoa.
What?
Jeez.
What?
You ought to see yourself, man. You got that stuff all over.
No, I don't. I was very careful.
All over you.
No, I was very careful. I used all the safety precautions.
You are going to radiate, glow in the dark.
No, I am not.
Dude, you ought to see this.
No, quit pulling my leg, because that's not funny.
I'm serious.
What do you mean?
You're covered with that.
I am not. I used gloves, and I used a mask and all that stuff.
Right, yeah, that'll do it.
But let's just quit messing around. Let's just go on. Let's just move on with the next part of the film, okay?
Don't come near me then.
You worry too much.
Yeah.
You worry too much. Anyhow, what are we going to do next? We're going to close this out and wrap this thing up, right?
We're going to get a fire extinguisher and a hose, and we're going to...
No, we're not.
You're not coming in the house, man.
Why not?
You're not going to turn our house into a Christmas display, glowing in the dark like that.
I'll prove a point to you.
Isn't going to happen.
I'll get my Geiger counter. Okay. So just to prove that you're wrong and I'm right, I'm going to... Ooh.
See? Told you. Told you.
Oh, crap. Okay.
We're going to have to put you in a landfill.